In the second tutorial here, we're going to go through and further analyze the data set and look at some values in the continuous domain. Now the continuous domain is stored as these fluid cells. Okay, we can visualize them here. This is really just the outside of the fluid domain. What may be more useful is to actually, rather than visualize the outside, is to right click on the part and say clip in the Z direction. This creates a clip in the Z direction through that part that we had selected, and by default it's just colored as a white. We can go down here and start to display other variables on that particular clip plane that we've created here by going through and dragging a variable, let's say ftemp, up onto that clip plane. Now the default for the ftemp is taken from the range of the model at the current time step. For this part we might like to actually change the range around to be based off that part. So let's do a right click on the legend. Let me move it over here into the window. Right click and say palette and set range to selected part min and max. So I'll take the part here, perform that same operation again. There we go. Now we've changed the range automatically to the min and max found on this particular part. If we want to adjust the exact values of this range, we can go to palette and we can say edit palette. This will bring us up the ability to specify the exact min and max for the palette. So let's say 1200 to 1300. Okay. Now the other thing that we've done here is that we have elemental values here displayed. So each different element has a different value, and this sometimes will look a little bit blocky. We'd like to perhaps smooth that. There's a graphical smooth that we can do by going up to Edit Preferences under Color Palettes and turning on this Use Continuous Palette for per element variables. So in the case where we have variables that are defined only per element, we're going to make a continuous palette. We're going to smooth them out here. And you can save this to your preference file so you don't have to do this every time. Now for this clip plane here, we can simply left click with the mouse and we get a little handle. If I now hold down the left mouse button and drag up or down, I can drag this clip plane further up and down. And in the lower left hand corner you can see a readout of what is the current location of that clip plane. And if I let go, EnSight will then update the display on that particular clip plane. Now we can create another clip plane here just by simply going to right click and clone. This will create another clip plane colored exactly the same way, currently at the same location, but if I do the left click again I can drag up and you can see I now have multiple planes that I can move and adjust. So it's a very quick way of duplicating what I've done. So I'm going to clone another one and I'm simply going to select with the left mouse button and then drag down. Okay. So I've been able to look at 3 different locations here. Maybe I'll pull temperature up here, and size is for the particle size. Okay, so we've got the ability to kind of visualize different planes through the model. Again, we could do other planes here. We could do right click and say clip in the X. We'll get an X plane. And we can take the same variable and drop that onto that part there if we'd like. Okay. Now I'm using the control button with the left mouse button to rotate about the screen axis as I move my model around. Okay. And again with this clip we can drag left or right. We can also define using the plane tool down here. I'm going to turn on the plane tool visibility. Okay, we have a plane tool here and I'm going to just grab the z-axis and rotate around at some compound angle. And we can also clip that fluid domain again with this plane. If I select the fluid cells here and go back to the plane, once I'm on the center I can do a right click and say create clip. Now I've got a clip defined by that plane, and again I can drag the variable temperature up onto that. And again I can left click on the part here. Sometimes the particles get in the way and thinks I'm selecting on the particles. Let me turn the particles off. So I'm going to left click on the plane. I can drag that plane up and down, okay, and redefine how that plane is created. So it could be at any arbitrary location. It doesn't have to be at an X, Y, or Z. It can be from an arbitrary location here as well. So what if we want an exact location for these clip planes? We can double click on the clip plane here in the parts list, and we have the detailed editor for that part that comes up. And here's the actual specification for the Z location for this clip. So let's make it 4. Let's double click on this part, make this 6. And double click on this part here and make him 2. Okay, so now we've got locations 2, 4, and 6. And our clip plane in the other direction here is at X, and we'll call this at X equals -1, something over near the wall. Okay. So now we've got the different clip planes here. We can turn the particles back on if we'd like to see the particles. Finally, in this tutorial, we'll go through and create an isosurface of temperature. So again, we choose the parent part for this isosurface, which will be the fluid elements. We'll do a right click and say isosurface. It'll ask us for the variable, and we're going to choose that same ftemp. Now by default, it's going to create a value at the mid location between the min and the max. But I actually want something up here which is maybe closer to 1250. So I'm going to double click on that isosurface part, and I can change the value for that value here as to be 1250. I've got a little volume here. That's essentially showing us the surface where we have the value of temperature equal to 1250. Similarly, if I left click on the isosurface and then left mouse button, hold down and drag left or right, I'll increase or decrease the value of that isosurface. Okay, so I can perhaps look at where the areas are, in this case, quite cold over on this side of the domain. Okay. Now, one further modification to the isosurface here is that I'm actually creating an iso volume. So I'm going to take and create an iso volume here, and this is going to be from the min of, let's say, 1150 up to the max of 1250. And now we've actually got the volume elements. We've essentially isolated those volume elements that have values between 1150 and 1250 degrees. Okay. Now this part here we can start to do calculator operations on, as well as visualize here, and we'll get to that in the next tutorial. So that's some basics on getting going with the clip plane here and the isosurface, and start to visualize your fluid domain.